My name is Martin Geitz. I'm President and CEO of Simsbury Bank, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today for our fourth collaborative event with UConn School of Business Family Business Program. Our partnership with UConn has been wonderful. We've had three great programs to date, and today's program I think is going to be particularly interesting, talking about issues of transition and family businesses. We have a wonderful panel who Dean Elliott will be introducing you to momentarily. And so my primary role here is to welcome you and to introduce Dean Elliott. I'm very pleased to say that we've been working with Dean John A. Elliott for the last 2.5 years on this work, done a variety of projects with them. Dean Elliott has been Dean of the UConn School of Business since 2012, and he, in addition to being Dean of the Business School, is the Orrin J. Fox Chair of Business. Prior to joining UConn, he was the Dean of the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College. And prior to that, he spent 20 years at my business school alma mater, Cornell University. During his career in academia, Dean Elliott, like all great academics, has had a great publishing and research career. His research has concentrated on the role of accounting information in financial analysis and in contracts. Recently, in 2018, just this year, Dean Elliott was elected the Vice Chair and Chair-elect of the AACSB International, the Association of Advanced Collegiate Schools of Business. He also serves as Chair of the PhD Project Academic Advisory Council. Very pleased to introduce you to Dean John Elliott.
Thanks very much, Martin. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your hospitality and the fact that you've been able to welcome such a wonderful group of people to this event this evening. The Family Business Program at UConn has been around for a long time, and it was interesting to me this evening to talk to a couple of people who were engaged with that program 20 years ago. And it may come out in the course of conversation exactly how those experiences from long ago have led to events that we're celebrating today in terms of some of the family businesses here. As we think about family businesses and our commitment at UConn to them, it's useful to put it in the context of the state of Connecticut and the fact that we think that it is important for the School of Business to be a convener of important conversations. And today, I think, is an example of an important conversation: transition and succession planning for the next generation in family businesses. But to put this in context, let's think about family businesses as an example of many small businesses. And in the United States and in the state of Connecticut, about 99% of the organizations are in fact small businesses, fewer than 500 employees. And about 50% of the employment happens in those small businesses. And the growth is concentrated in those small businesses. So this is a really large opportunity and a large group of enterprising companies and individuals that we really want to see supported going forward. I was taken recently by an article in the Wall Street Journal that was about the book, The Founder's Dilemmas by Noam Wasserman. And in this marketing piece, if you will, for The Founder's Dilemma, there was a reference to the fact that often downplayed in the excitement of starting up a new business venture is one of the most important decisions entrepreneurs will face. Should they go it alone or bring in co-founders, hires, and investors to help build the business? More than just financial rewards are at stake. Friendships and relationships can suffer. Bad decisions at the inception of a promising venture lay the foundations for its eventual ruin. In recent coverage of Wasserman in the Wall Street Journal, one of the key section headings for family businesses and small businesses was raise painful subjects early. So as we go through our conversation today, I think one of the themes that I'll be interested in hearing about from our panel is what are the conversations that are really important here? How does their timing matter? And how do we get to them in due course? And what does due course mean? When is it timely? Our panel, I'm going to ask to introduce themselves, and to tell you just a little bit about who they are and what their connection to family business and transition and succession planning might be. Starting on my far right, we have Coleman Levy, a consultant advisor and founding partner of Levy and Droney, PC. We have Megan Summers West, president of CNC Software, Inc. And this is a second generation business. To my second right, Don Bodell, partner of Whitman Advisors. And finally, Sabrina Beck, co-owner and vice president of business development at Altec Electronics. So could I ask you to begin, Sabrina, and just tell us a bit about yourself, transition, and your company.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm a second generation family business owner. My father started our company back in 1972, and I joined the company 20 years ago. Our company is Altec Electronics. We assemble circuit boards used in high-cost capital equipment like mammography machines and elevators. And I work with my father and my brother, who's the CEO.
Don?
Hi, I had the opportunity to start at the other side of the economy and talk with large corporations, and did that for the first half of my career, and then in 2003, became involved with privately owned businesses, and I've never looked back. I find some of the best business people I've seen are really in entrepreneurial private businesses. Initially I came in to help private equity firms that wanted to invest in family-owned businesses and help them understand and work with the team. And that has transitioned to, I do a lot of advisory work with family businesses for both transitioning generationally, when they decide they would like to recapitalize. And so it could be helping to bring in talent that they don't have, or position a company for growth in the future.
Megan?
Megan West. I'm the president and CEO of CNC Software, and we're the makers of Mastercam, which is sorry about that. We are a technology company, so we often have glitches in technology. I've been running the company for the last 4 years, been there full-time for 10 years. Second generation, my father started the company 2 weeks before I was born, 35 years ago. So I've kind of gotten my PhD in business just by listening to him and my uncle. My mom is the CFO there. My uncle is the executive vice president. My dad still comes in once in a while. He's the chairman. I also have aunts, uncles, cousins. So we've got quite a few people there. We're up to about 180 employees, 190 actually now. And interestingly, I did want to mention, 20 years ago, I was a member of the UConn Family Business Program, and I utilized their services to kind of help me, talking with my dad about succession planning. So it's nice to kind of be back here and kind of having that conversation as well.
My name is Coleman Levy. I cause a lot of confusion. I've been a practicing lawyer for over 50 years. I was a founding member of Levy and Droney. We merged in, I think in 2013 with Hinckley Allen, and I retired from the firm in the end of 2015, and have had a wonderful experience of being a advisor, consultant, negotiator, and evaluator for a number of my clients who asked me to stay on with them. In my experience, I've had the opportunity to represent primarily family-owned and privately owned businesses of varying sizes, from pizza shops to family-owned businesses that do $750+ million a year. And I've been very much involved as the advisor in terms of succession planning and how to deal with that. And I've been in situations of successfully navigating that river, and also have been involved, unfortunately, in situations where there were implosions and breakups. And I can tell you this, I've learned a lot more from the breakups, unfortunately, than from the successes. And so that's sort of my background. In addition to that, my wife has run a family business, which is now in the second generation. So we've been able to experience that transition also. So not only do I have a little bit of the theoretical, but I have a lot of the practical.
So when we talk about transition and succession, those two words come together to sort of suggest that the answer will be a continuation in the family, going from one generation to the next. But not all transitions are of that type. So let me ask each of you to share some perspective on when it's time to start thinking about transitions and how you think about the question, is it a transition within the family as succession, or is it some other opportunity that needs to be considered and discussed and evaluated? You want to give us a start?
Sure. So in my experience, our business transitioned back in 2004. My father, I believe, was 65. And I think he had some concerns and some doubts about whether the succession would be successful. And here we are in 2018, and we have grown to 35 million in revenue and 200 employees. So in our case, our succession was successful. I think that the reason my father considered transitioning the business to his children is because he wanted to stay involved in the business. And he felt by bringing the children in, it would be his way to do that. If he sold the company, he'd probably have to exit after a period of time. So my dad, who's 87, is still involved in our business today. And he comes in every day and runs the engineering team and is still a vital part of our company. So that was meaningful to him. And I think that was the biggest reason he transitioned within the family.
What have you experienced, Don?
So I've been involved in over 100 transactions or transitions, and I've seen them done very well and done very poorly. And I think the ones that were done well is when the family dynamics that are complex and can be emotional are identified, but the decisions are based on hard, objective data, and people separate the two. Some of the ones where I have seen where we have said we're going to keep it in the family, and they have ignored that, it's not always gone well. I'm working now with a company that went through the transition and said the fourth generation is not up to the task. And they brought me in, and we actually recruited a COO who will become CEO. And there is a fifth generation involved, but they're going very professionally. We're putting together a board of directors to run it as more like a public company, but keep it in the family. So in this case, they've been able to do both.
So for me, it was kind of interesting. I knew by the time I was maybe 5 or 6 years old that this is what I wanted to do. And so my dad really nurtured that and spent a lot of time kind of developing my interest in business. So for us, timing was everything. And my dad's pretty young. We just celebrated his 60th birthday back in June. So he's young, but he also, he identified pretty quickly that the business sort of outgrew his interest and his skill level and what he was good at. He started off as an applications engineer, so he was very technical, but the job really grew into much more of an operations, talking to people, that kind of thing, and it just wasn't what he loved to do, and it definitely caused some stress for him. So he was ready to pass it off, as soon as he could. That being said, we also didn't try and fit a square peg into a round hole. If I wasn't qualified or capable, he wouldn't have passed it down to somebody else in the family. We were lucky that it was something that I was interested in, something that I went to school for, and something that I was really qualified for. And we spent a lot of time making sure that I was positioning myself so that the employees there trusted me and were confident in my leadership skills. So In terms of timing, I mean, I think timing is everything. You gotta make sure that you take all the right steps and be very intentional about those steps that you take. Communicate to the right people and not try and force something that isn't going to work.
What's your experience been, Coleman?
Well, first of all, I want to say you're very fortunate that your father.
I am.
No, you're very fortunate that your father had that foresight and the ability to let go, which is one of the real major problems in business transition that I've seen, okay? Number one, a couple of the elements that I really try and profess to people is that as there was an article in the New York Times just recently, November 17th, the Talk with Kids, how and when to talk to your children about money. Have a plan and be ready to listen. Because when you're in a family business and you have a family business, finances are going to be discussed at the dinner table whether you like it or you don't like it. So that's part of the problem, the process of being transparent and being honest and being open with the children in the family. And then understand that leadership is not determined by seniority or by sex, okay? It's determined by ability. And to be honest about that, maybe all the children will have the same equity, but that doesn't necessarily that just because a person is the oldest that they're going to be the next CEO of the company, or maybe they're not going to be involved. So what I've seen mostly is the problems occur when there isn't openness and discussion and honesty. And where I see the problems occur is you'll learn when you have to learn. And when you have to learn, it's too late.
You've raised an interesting question there, and I think I'd like to come back to you, Megan, and ask you to tell us a little bit more about your process, because there's a tendency to think that Dad wakes up one morning and says, you know, it might be time for me to move on and hand it off, and 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months later, we're all done. How long did your planning process and structuring take to get you from, I think I'm ready and my dad thinks I am, to I'm the CEO?
Well, I mean, again, I'm kind of unique. My process started almost 20 years ago when I was 16. We went to a family business program seminar and talked to other companies that were in different stages of succession, and they gave us some ideas on how to kind of set ourselves up for success. So we put a very clear plan in place that I had to go to school, I had to work somewhere else for 2 years, partly for my own self-confidence, but also the credibility of the employees. Get a good perspective, and then I had to get my MBA. And then once I did that and moved back to the office, I started there full time, and I had to work in a few different departments just to gain some perspective, some understanding, some empathy. And my dad always uses the word positioning, and if I didn't position myself properly, then I wouldn't have been considered for leadership. And what I mean by positioning is earning that respect and that trust and that confidence of the employees, because if you can't get them to buy into your leadership, then I'm going to struggle. So I spent a lot of time really working on my relationship with the employees and making sure that they were comfortable with me and making sure that I was comfortable with them. So I started full time about 10 years ago. And I worked in several different departments, became the operations manager about 5.5, 6 years ago. And that was really when we kind of decided that it was going to happen. And then 2 years later, I became the CEO. And I think it was pretty clear to all the employees, it is a very close family business. And at that time, we were maybe 120, 130 employees. I knew the names of every single one of their spouses, all their kids, what they like to do on the weekend, that kind of thing. And so we were pretty close and very open. But it was a long process, and I think that not rushing into it was good, because I was able to make some very important strategic decisions even before I became CEO, and that helped to increase the confidence level of the employees as well, that they got comfortable with my leadership style, they knew what they were getting into, and so that made it a very smooth transition. It
Right.
was
And-
very
And
seamless.
Coleman is right. You were in a lucky place with a family that
Absolutely.
had foresight and planning, and in Wasserman's terms, you raised a painful subject of transition early and planned and got through it. And let me ask you, Sabrina, to give us a little bit of that same level of granularity, if you would, about your experience. What was the time frame? for
I
some of
had
this?
graduated from college and went to work in the financial services industry and worked there for 10 years before I joined the family business. My brother joined 5 years prior to me, even though he's a couple of years younger than I am, but just in his career, that was the right time to come into the business. And so I really cherish the years that I had working for financial services and developing some knowledge and some self-confidence and just kind of a worldview of how things worked before coming into the family business. Because as family businesses, they typically, if you're the first or second or third generation, you're experiencing the business growing from its infancy, and so you don't necessarily have the opportunity to see how bigger companies do things unless you spend some time there. And so I was able to bring some knowledge and some information with me that helped me to succeed in the family business. Does that answer your question?
That answers my question, thank you.
Very good.
But it was a multi-year effort, in some ways similar to Megan.
Yes.
Coleman, examples from your experience of the good and the bad on this?
Well, I'll make it lineal in a sense of not saying, it just becomes more complex when, say, two brothers start a business and then you're into the next generation, okay? But I'll just bring up that when you get into the second generation and, the first generation, the children all came out of one household with one mother and father, basically, okay? And the values that were transmitted, whatever they may be, were pretty similar to all of the children. Now we get into the second generation, okay? And now the children, their children are growing up, and there's different wives or different husbands, and the values in the houses are a little different, and they're brought up a little differently. And therefore, this is when conflict starts to arise, okay, or can arise, okay? Then you can see how this multiplies almost geometrically when the starters of the business were two brothers or two sisters or a brother and a sister, and then we've got families out here, and then we have to start making some rules and regulations as to how we're going to transmit and how we're going to transfer authority, okay, and decision-making ability. And I always bring up this point, and I've said this to many clients, and I've said, you started the business and you made a mistake, okay, and it cost $10,000, okay? You buried it. You didn't come home and brag to your wife that you screwed up today and we lost $10,000, okay? But in the second generation, when you're dealing with your son or your daughter, you're quick to be a Monday morning quarterback and point out those negatives and not so quick to reinforce the positives, okay? What you want to do is reinforce the positives, and when there's something that goes wrong, be constructive about it and sit down and discuss it and figure out what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how we can avoid that in the future instead of using a stick over the head. I just find that to be something that's prevalent in the difference between the first generation and second generation. And I see a lot of people sitting around and going like this, okay? So I'm not far off base.
Don, you talked about having 100 examples. Can you cherry pick two that sort of inform us about these choices?
Sure. I'd like to use two. First of all, with Megan and Sabrina had done is their transition was indicative of what I've seen as successful in a number of ways. One, working outside the business, and the other thing, complimenting you on wanting to gain the respect of the employees. A lot of the unsuccessful ones I've seen where I've got the name, and they kind of think that gives them the respect, and you've got to earn respect, as everyone knows. The other example, I helped put together the first time I did a board for a family business that was doing what Coleman just talked about, was the father retired and moved to Florida and had 3 siblings in the business. He retired and was transitioning ownership over a period of years, but he would fly up every other month and tell them everything they were doing wrong. And it was horrible. They then, the siblings were fighting in-house. They ended up getting a psychologist to work with them that specialized in it. And now I'm helping them through the generation transition to the next one, and they learn from that. And they're putting a plan in place, and they're doing what you did, where they have to work 5 years outside of it, and so it's working well. But I think you're spot on, and those are some of the issues that you see multiple times.
And the other thing that happens many times is that I've found in talking to the owners of the business, I said, you necessarily will not be the person who will designate who the leader of this company will be, but it will be your offspring, your children will sit around the table, and they will basically end up, if they've been brought up correctly and understand that the objective, remember this, the objective all the time is that the cow has to remain healthy. If the cow does not remain healthy, okay, the milk will get rancid and everybody will get sick. If the cow is healthy all the time, the milk is sweet, okay, and everybody prospers. That's a very critical element, okay? And I'm going to just give you an example of one situation that I had in a family, okay? And there was one operating business. There was one boy, one male, and 3 females. And what happened is the son was running the business. He had gone out and then came back and ran it. And one of the daughters was in the business, and she got married, and she left and went to Boston, and the other was in Boston. And everybody was doing well. And we had a family meeting, and the father asked if I would conduct a family meeting. We conducted a family meeting, and they all agreed that the business should be his. We're going to put a price on it. They put a mortgage, and the 3 girls got the monthly payment for a period of 10 years, giving up their interest. Everybody was happy. And the family really gets along exceptionally well. And they come to Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners, and they all talk to each other, okay? And, but it was open and honest and discussed. And they all agreed to it, and they were all satisfied. And so I think openness is a critical element in the process.
So we've talked about succession and transition, and had some good examples of within the family working, but it's always useful to think about what are the alternatives. So let's say we've got a company, it's thriving, it's doing fairly well, and we have to confront this question: do we look for a transition within the family or some other solution? And I just thought some of you might have a few thoughts about an ESOP, a sale to existing employees of some kind or another, a sale to an outsider, other kinds of transactions, and how they are good or bad for the family in this case. Thoughts? Sure.
I'd be happy to, because as I mentioned, I started getting involved with private equity firms looking at family businesses and helping them evaluate, whether they should buy them and what needed to be done. And you get to see a lot of the family dynamics, and some were very smooth, where the family agreed that no one wanted to really run it. I was involved, I can talk with, somebody knows York wall coverings, where my client purchased them. It was a large family business, and they had a daughter in the business who would have liked to have run it, but they went through a very objective process and said it was created more value for the family to sell it outside. They retained an interest in it, and she retained a major job. And that worked out well. Some families are, it doesn't work out well. Some are resentful, some try to stay in the business for a while and work out a deal with the equity firms. That quite often, or usually, doesn't go well there. But it also works well when it could be half in, half out, where you could bring in an outside investor, where the family can take some of their value off the table there, but continue to be involved in the business there. And I won't go into it, but I was on the board of Mott Corporation of Farmington for 5 years, was an ESOP, which is very complex, but it could be right for the right families. But I probably need an attorney like Coleman to explain where it fits right.
Your thoughts, Coleman?
Well, I think that the toughest situation is when the leadership honestly comes to the conclusion that there's nobody in the next generation that can run the business, okay? And that's a very, very tough situation, because it's not totally objective, all right? It's a big difference if you're at a public corporation and you look at a person and they're not satisfying the objectives of their responsibility, and you say, Friday's the last day. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not emotional, okay, in the sense of when you're talking about, you're looking at an offspring and offsprings, and you have to come to what's best for the family. And if we're going to maximize our major asset, this is what we have to do at this time. And then we have to prepare, or we're going to go to the outside and we're going to get a professional CEO to run our business. And I find that there's a lot more emotional and psychological problems in doing this than the actual legal or the mechanics of doing it. Drawing up a plan that is not discussed with the family and how it's going to be and if it's going to work is really, in most situations, a real design for failure. Because anybody can draw up a plan, and you know that you go to the computer and you draw up a financial plan, you press a couple of buttons and they change the numbers around, but is there any reality to it, okay? And that happens sometimes with a plan that a family sets up, and this is the way it's going to be. Well, that way doesn't work many times. So I go back to the same basic concept of openness, honest discussions, the strengths and the weaknesses of the various people, and what is our objective.
God?
Yeah, I have found when you get in those difficult situations, it's hard to, the companies that get through them with the least turmoil are ones that either have a formal board of outside advisors with independent directors, or trusted advisors that understand the business and understand the dynamic, that you can really have someone that doesn't have an emotional and a family or an equity investment in the firm. And I've seen the families tend to listen to them if they're smart and say, okay, I need to step away from the family or have someone that can really show me how it looks from the outside. So I would advise any firm, whether it's a small, informal, group of outside advisors, it, doesn't have to be costly or anything like that, but that stay involved and that you can bounce ideas off of.
I'd like to echo what you just said, if I may.
Please.
Like Megan, we also utilized the Family Business Program when we first started this transition, and my father had a support group, and my brother and I had a support group, and so he was with the first generation, or the seniors, and we were with the second generation, or the children who were receiving the ownership in the company. And not only were the advisors who were working with UConn Family Business Program, but also the peers were invaluable to us in helping us work through the process. So I echo what you say. It's a good idea.
And one of the things that I think we've found useful, as suggested, is within the Family Business Program, it's some of the connections that are made between families, between companies, that create peer-to-peer communication, a trust, a level of questioning and engagement, and pursuing what your options are, thinking through good outcomes. I'm interested because so far we've talked about some good outcomes, some family decisions that were effective, but what we haven't done as much talking about is how do we actually structure it? At the moment, as I listened, it feels like there's a senior family member who runs the company and is making the decisions, willing second generations who kind of collaborate with them. But apropos of our lawyers on the board and advisors on the board, what does this look like legally? Is it a sole proprietorship that then makes a transition? How do you structure the ownership interest, the voting rights, the power from a legalistic perspective, or it evolves? Thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'd like to make a comment here. I think, if we were here maybe 25 years ago and we were having this panel, I don't think we would have two females on the panel. And I think that in and of itself says a tremendous amount about the families that they come from in order to effectuate transition, okay? Because in many, many families, the most capable and the most competent and in the family is a female, is a sister, and sometimes they're overlooked, and I've seen that happen in many, many situations. But the world is changing, thank God. Well, I say that because my wife is a terrific CEO. So. But the question that you asked is how do you...
What happens legalistically, structurally?
Well,
how do you assure voices are at the table and heard? Or does it evolve organically just because of goodwill among the parties?
No. People start to address it at a young age, okay, in a family. They talk about it, how they can transition. If you're really, I always say that, they're your children, okay? You raise them, or you instill the values into those children as to how to conduct themselves. And so at some point in time, you've got to let them go. And you've got to, you're going to respect their decision and how they're going to take care of it. I've said to fathers very simply, I said, what are you worried about control if you have confidence in your children? Do you think that they're going to turn against you? I mean, if you think that they're going to turn against you, then there's a different issue. But if you have really confidence in your children, okay, then you can have the most effective estate plan take place without any difficulty. It's when you keep trying to hold on to everything for a long period of time, and you're going to build your estate versus transmitting that estate in a sensible way, it's pretty good. But there has to be planning, okay? And children are going to tell you, I don't want to go into business. That's not for me. I'm going to be a musician or something else, and you can't force the situation. I think that it evolves as a result of discussion and leadership and going to your trusted advisors and sitting down and discussing it with the proposed next generation. You know, I've been in situations where fathers and mothers have come to me and said, you know, Coleman, our children are off doing something else, and I don't know if they're coming into the business or they're not coming into the business, but if they're not coming into the business, then we have to prepare it for sale, because I'm not going to do this for another 20 years or 15 years. And so I've gone and I've had that discussion. You know, what are you going to do? Are you coming in or are you staying out? A lot of things come out of that, okay? But you got to talk, you got to communicate, and you've got to lay down what your expectations are and what their expectations are, and putting the plan together after you have that is not very difficult.
I just want to put you all on notice. Your Q&A opportunity comes as we get to the end of this flow, but I want to go to Megan next on this same set of topics.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that I'll add to this. So we do a lot of planning as well. My father actually kind of runs a family meeting at the end of every single year. So it's usually right around Christmas, because that's when everybody's together. He puts an agenda together.
Does he give out the bonuses then?
It's, you know, the topics are usually revenue of the company, health, taxes, estate planning, that kind of thing, and we go through this list, and that way everybody is very aware of what the direction is. The other thing is that, you know, and I say a lot of what my dad says, because he's my biggest mentor. He's a gem if you guys have not met him. He says fair is not always equal, and equal is not always fair, and that was something that we really took to heart. So I'm the oldest of 5, the only one that was really interested in the company. My next sibling, my brother, he's this amazing photographer, very creative, would run the business into the ground, just wouldn't do well. And he readily admits that. My sister opened up her own restaurant out in San Francisco at the age of 21, ran that successfully, and then became a farmer in Sonoma. You know, just very independent, very entrepreneurial. And then I have 2 younger brother and sister. They're 21 and 20, so they're still kind of finding their way. The oldest of the 3 have shares in the company. The younger 2 do not. They're kind of dealt with separately, you know, real estate, that kind of thing. And we were given an equal amount, the oldest 3, and then I was allowed to purchase more because of my involvement in the company. So even though I'm the CEO, I'm not the majority shareholder or the majority owner. We deal with that by voting shares and non-voting shares. So we kind of use a couple of different ways to manage these situations. And again, a lot of it is based on, you know, we have these communications, we talk, everybody understands, you know, the situation, and that's really helped us. And honestly, I think the other part of it is that we grew up never feeling entitled. You know, my parents never allowed us to behave that way, and so none of us expected any of it. You know, we're just very grateful to be a part of the company in any way that we can be, and we work hard to keep that going.
Don?
I would say my experience has been there's so many different options for it there. And there's good ones and bad ones. And the example that was brought up about if you were concerned about are the kids going to not work well together, I've seen agreements pulled together that when it gets to where they want to transition, it has tied up the company and it has restricted them for doing the things that are in the best interest of the business. For example, with 3 siblings and 1 or 4 siblings, no decision could be made on the exit or anything with all 4 agreeing. And it was impossible to do that. So I think, you know, I don't know what the answer, and there's probably people that, you know, attorneys that have worked well with, and business advisors, family business, but I would look at a lot of options and really think about what the different combinations could be in the future before I'd select anyone. I think the voting shares, though, I've seen it's worked well versus equity, and you know, so, but there's a lot of options, and be real careful that you don't pick one that you regret 10 years from now.
Sabrina?
So there are 3 children in my family. My father structured the transition a little bit differently than Megan's father. My brother and I both work in the company, and so my father gifted shares of the company to the 2 of us. And my sister is going to enjoy her inheritance when my father passes away. And so my father's philosophy was that he didn't want someone owning the company if they weren't working in it. And I know that he did that with all good intent, and he's very concerned about treating the children fairly. My brother and I are very happy with the way things are. My sister, unfortunately, is not. So those families who are considering structuring the transition in that way, I'll caution you that it can be very painful for the child who is not only not working in the business, but not enjoying the profits of the business.
Thank you for a very interesting conversation to date. Let me open the floor to questions. There is a mic right there. If anyone has a question, just go to the mic so we can capture the question and be sure we can all hear it. And the first question is from Martin.
So that while everyone else is a little shy, I'm sure you will all stand up and ask a question. I'll get it going. You talked a little, particularly in this last segment, about ownership and you know, how you make decisions and so forth. I'm curious about whether there is a role and where you've seen a role for outside of the family advisors, and is it structured, unstructured, formal, informal? Do you reach out to non-family members for, in any kind of formalized or informal manner, for advice and guidance?
Yeah, I'll start. I have a lot of mentors. You know, I'm a continuous learner. I kind of thrive on that, and I know that I don't know everything. I'm part of an organization called the Young Presidents Organization, the YPO group. And that's been tremendously helpful for me because, you know, a lot of my friends are not in the same situation that I'm in, and it's difficult to talk to them about some of, you know, the issues that I face on any given day. And so this group of people faces a lot of the same issues that I do, and that has been very helpful. You know, just kind of connecting with other leaders, other female leaders. And I would say, you know, our executive team, I put together an executive team at the beginning of the year. I kind of reorged the entire company and put together, you know, the people that I really trusted and felt confident that they would be able to help me lead the company. So that's worked well for us. We don't have a formal board, and right now we're comfortable with that. That being said, we are growing at a very fast rate, and I imagine that's something that we'll look into in the next couple of years. But for now, that's been working for us.
Other comments in response to Martin?
I can say that I too am involved in some organizations, smaller manufacturers organization, Women in Manufacturing, and they also have helped me to get some advice from other family business owners and small business owners. And my brother is involved in a CBIA roundtable, so they've been very helpful.
I guess I would add, I think the YPO or whatever, I've actually spoken at those, and I think those are great and very helpful and can be. I think that the one benefit, whether it's informal or formal, of have advisors that work with your business over a period of time and understand it in detail and understand it, whether, you know, it's a formal where there's like, you know, monthly board calls and board meetings, or informal but they become more intimately involved in the specifics of the business you're in and the issues there. I think that can help, especially as you grow and the company gets bigger.
Coleman?
I've found that having advisors who evolve with you over a period of time and get to know you and get to know the business and get to know the family and get to know how you operate is critical. A lot of people think it's very sexy to have a board, okay? Well, you know, what you wish for, you might not want, okay? And in addition to that, but there's two things that occur. And there's a difference between an advisory board and a formal legal board. But in either situation, if you have a board with outside people or an advisory group with outside people, and they start making recommendations, and there are a number of recommendations, and you don't follow through with those recommendations, although they might not have any legal standing, okay, it's going to disband, okay, because they're going to feel that they have absolutely no involvement, and you know they're getting $500 to come to a meeting or something of that sort, but it's meaningless and it doesn't work. So be very careful and very cautious when it comes to that arena.
Okay,
Final comment.
okay, quick one on that. The point, the company I mentioned before with the siblings that weren't getting along and the father coming back, I helped them put together an advisory board, and it was much more high-powered than they could expect. They left a year and a half later, they disbanded it. And I called up the brother I knew best. I said, why? Were you unhappy? He goes, no, they told us all the right things, but we didn't want to listen to them. And they literally disbanded the board.
That's it.
Happens. Question?
I was intrigued by the comment, Ms. West, you had about your family meeting. First of all, your father sounds wonderful. And in the family meeting, what do you do with looking for ways to kind of draw information out? If a parent is a control freak, and there are topics they don't want to talk about. So they'll talk about revenue, talk about kind of the business, but will not talk about their health. And you kind of know, you've grown up with them all your life, but you kind of know something's going on, but that generation just didn't talk about that with their children. Strategies for kind of helping in those, when you're in a family meeting?
Well, I would say in that situation, maybe getting agenda items ahead of time, letting people know what the expectations are of what they're going to be talking about. And the other thing is maybe everybody needs to talk about their health. So it's not you're singling out one person and expecting that answer from them, but saying, okay, we want an update from everybody, and that might make things a little bit more comfortable or easy for them to share.
Other questions?
Everybody better get Pelotons.
Yes, coming up to the mic, and then we'll go with you next.
First of all, thank you, everybody. That was really great. Question as to whether anyone has dealt with the potential of a liquidity event. So a third party coming in and offering perhaps a significant sum that some in the family think is enough, more than enough, and others perhaps not.
I can say that I probably get an email once a day, maybe more, from a private equity firm, at least. And, I think for us, we're really fortunate. I mean, right now, all the owners of the company, we define our success by the amount of people that we can positively impact their lives. And right now, our ability to do that is by running this company. I mean, the numbers are high. It's, we've been given some really impressive proposals, but I also think that we're just kind of one of those families that isn't driven by that. I'm not sure I would change my lifestyle. If I was, I'm not really sure what I would do. I feel like I would have no purpose.
Start another business.
So, we're really lucky that we're kind of all on the same page. Now, that being said, I'm painting a pretty picture here, but there have certainly been struggles. My uncle is the executive vice president, and he definitely was not on board, as much as everybody was, and rightly so. I can completely understand, his situation. I think, he was in the company for 30 years and perhaps expected to have a leadership position. So there is conflict, and it's a lot more emotional when it's family because, you don't just leave the office and not have to deal with that person. Like, I have to go have Christmas dinner with him. and we just spent Thanksgiving at his house, and we share a family summer home in Cape Cod. We spend a lot of time together. You know, I can never say that we will never do it. You know, I can't guarantee anything, but for right now, we're all on the same page, and we're all pretty happy with how things are going.
Before we take your question, I would like to just explore this one more second, and that is, given that we just talked about the outside offer that comes in for the company, one of the other places where valuation often plays a role is when the first generation and second generation are working out a transition plan. It's sometimes the case that the first generation thinks the value is here, and the second generation thinks it's here. And how do you close that gap? And how do you close the gap when the first generation thinks the value is here, in large part because of the value they add every day, and if they go away, that'll go away? Thoughts about that question, and then we'll take the last one. Coleman?
Dean, well, I did have a situation like that in the first generation and a second generation, or maybe a second and a third generation. And the older person walked in to the annual meeting when they set valuation, and all of a sudden he established, he set forth a value that was twice as much as the previous year, and the economics didn't warrant it, let's put it that way, okay? And there was really a battle that took place. And the alternative in that situation was, if you can't come to an agreement, it'll be book value, okay? Which was way down. And the next generation said, we're not budgeting. You need our vote, and we're not doing a dime, and we'll just wait for you to die. I mean, in reality, that's exactly what was said.
Right.
And what it ended up doing, it broke up the business. It broke up the business.
So I've been involved from both of the buy side on that, but from board perspective, and in two examples, one privately held and one in an ESOP, and there's a debate. And the ESOP makes it more complicated because you have to take the impact on all the owners of the firm, which are all employees. I think the answer is pretty clear on that. Is you just, you know, today there's so much activity, you can just go out there. You can get an independent advisor to say, here are the market comps. This is the multiples of EBITDA you get. So, you know, all these debates were going on the board, and we said, okay, EBITDA is $10 million, and the companies are going for $6 million. So it's a $60 million value, and there's a certain amount of debt. And you can do that. You get an outside independent advisor that has exposure to other, not exactly, and that can get it away from the, I think it's here, and I think it's here, and it narrows the band so you can have a real discussion.
Excellent. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kim Pita, and my question is, I actually ran a business with my ex-spouse for 17 years, and it ended in a divorce, and ultimately the business ended up closing. One of the things that we learned early on was we got two pieces of advice. Never drive together to the office, and never talk about your business in the bedroom. And we tried to abide by that, but it didn't save our marriage, unfortunately. My question to you is, what do you do to disconnect? Because you're always with your family, you're always with them, you're with them during the day, you're with them at night, you can't get away from it, you can't, in the office you can't scream at each other, and then at home you don't want to scream at each other. So how do you guys disconnect from it all to make it work?
My husband's sitting right in the back there. Honey, you want to wave? And he would probably say we don't. Because we have family dinners and it's all business talk. My dad, my mom, my uncle, it's kind of what we do. So he and I like to escape to Hawaii at least once a year. That's how we disconnect. But I think, again, it is hard to disconnect, but it's also part of what we love. We're very passionate about it, and so we really enjoy talking about it, and I think that's great. But the other thing is that we find other hobbies. you know, my husband and my mom are in business together. They are in real estate, and, you know, they kind of connect on that. And so we bring that into the discussion. You know, we're all very into health and wellness. That gets brought into the discussion. So I think as long as you have hobbies and other things that you connect with, that's a good way to kind of remove yourself.
We have a,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
Please.
We have a rule that we don't talk about family business at the Thanksgiving dinner table or the birthday table or the Christmas table. There's a hard line, especially if the spouses and the kids are around. We also, at least I try, not to disparage my father or my brother, even if I've had an interaction with them where I'm frustrated or disappointed. I try not to disparage them to my spouse, because while he might be a good source of empathy for me, he's going to remember that at the next family gathering. So maybe the spouse isn't the best person to go to wind down.
Okay.
Yeah,
Coleman.
find other outlets, right.
Well, I sort of call it the dinner table. And the business is part of family life. No matter what, business is going to be discussed because it's a major part of your lives. It's part of your DNA, but it's got to be in moderation, okay? And you've got to deal with it, not in a confrontational manner. You got to learn to enjoy each other, and you start to discuss other things such as community involvement, values, philanthropy, and how you're going to conduct yourselves with regard to your business. But it's a very, very important part of who you are, and it's going to be discussed. Somebody can't get up and say, we're not talking about the business anymore. That's not going to happen, okay? But it's how you do it, and the moderation, and the discussion in family, and it's important for the younger children in the family to hear this and to learn about it and to understand that it's part of the way you not only survive, but you prosper. And this is what has produced the things that we've been able to have and accomplish in our family, so you have to have an understanding of that.
Thank you. And I'm hoping that you all will help me thank our panelists for a very interesting evening. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, John, and thank you, panel, for a really great and invigorating discussion this afternoon. I really appreciate all of you participating and taking your time. There are really too many takeaways for me to recap effectively, so I have two quotes, though, that I'm definitely going to take with me. One is, keep the cow healthy. And the other one is, fair is not always equal, and equal is not always fair. I think those are a couple of things to keep in mind. So Simsbury Bank's purpose in collaborating with UConn and the Family Business Program is to create more knowledge and more access to information that's useful to family businesses, useful to our economy, and frankly, useful to Simsbury Bank. Many of our folks are here today, and this is another opportunity for them to learn about family businesses, and we are trying to and continue to try to build our knowledge in family businesses, because we'd like to be the bank for family businesses in Connecticut, and this has been a great way for us to do it, partnering with UConn and UConn's Family Business Program. One of the other things that we're doing, Simsbury Bank is doing now to add to knowledge and conversation in the state is focusing on manufacturing. Manufacturing is really a growth driver of Connecticut's economy today. And we launched several months ago a podcast series called Manufacturing Matters. And although the focus is on manufacturing, many of our guests have been family business owners or advisors to family business owners. So inevitably in the podcast, you'll get also insights into family businesses and manufacturing. If you go to your podcast app and type in Manufacturing Matters, we will pop up there somewhere in there, and you can, I'd encourage you to check those out. One final note, with the conclusion of the program, after Robin speaks, The bar will be open and we'll have hors d'oeuvres, and I would certainly hope that everyone will have an opportunity to stay and chat with other folks who are here this afternoon. Finally, I'd like to introduce the person that we work with very closely, who is the head of the Family Business Program for UConn's Business School, Robin Bieneman. One of the things, important things that they've developed in UConn is on the academic side and on the continuing education side. So last year they created a base camp program with a number of modules, and members of Simsbury Bank attended most of those to provide some insight and some feedback. And they're going to launch again, not to step on what you're going to talk about, but they're going to launch again the base camp next year, and I'm looking forward to having really many of our Simsbury bankers attend the entire program, because it really is a great program you've put together. So, Robin Bieneman.
Thank you. Thank you to Simsbury Bank again. We are loving these social networking communication events. I'm looking forward to more. We'll have another one in the spring, but I'm here to talk about upcoming events. To Martin's point about our base camp, we're doing a survey to find out more about what family businesses and the resources that support them want. So we hope when you get an email about a survey for Family Business Base Camp that you'd give us some feedback. We're going to launch that in the spring. We're also doing another round of interns. We've got family business interns. We did a program last summer. We're going to launch that again this coming spring. We'd like to get more interns, more family business students, or more students into family businesses. We think that's a huge piece of our economy, and they get to Aetna, but maybe not to Payne's Recycling or Keating Insurance. So we'll have more information on that. We're doing another family business dinner at a wonderful horse farm in the spring. I think that's it. We'll get you more information on the base camp, but you can learn about all of our programs at the Family Business Program at UConn. So we'd welcome you all and hope you'll join us. And thanks again for showing up. This is great. Thank you.